First, some background for you. Last month, we took a deep dive into Oregon's public defense crisis, which is causing thousands of criminal defendants to be released without representation, meaning those cases aren't being prosecuted for weeks or months, sometimes not at all. Multnomah County District Attorney Nathan Vasquez says it's not about a shortage of public defenders. It's that nonprofit attorneys are refusing to take enough cases, which he calls a work stoppage. A nonprofit attorney we spoke with said that's false. Instead, he says, these attorneys are burned out, many leaving their firms, and the attorneys replacing them are not experienced enough to take on as many cases. Now, that is a very boiled down version, but if you'd like to see our full report, there's more on kgw.com or our YouTube page. But since our report last month, things have escalated. The Oregon agency in charge of fixing the public defender problem is the Oregon Public Defense Commission, or OPDC. They're the ones with a 6-year plan to get the state back on track. But recently, a state lawmaker, Democratic Representative Paul Evans, asked a different state agency, the Oregon Judicial Department, to help break down that 6-year plan so he could better understand it, writing, "I'm generally able to absorb bureaucratic jibber-jabber. Unfortunately, I cannot make heads nor tails of the report." Well, someone at the Judicial Department got back to him with a pretty in-depth analysis of the plan, and it was not a shining review. Far from it. They basically said the 6-year plan does not actually seem capable of getting us out of this crisis anytime soon, if at all. And they gave reasons why. First, the plan calls for a different caseload model, which would have attorneys taking about half as many cases as they are now. You can see comparisons here. The plan calls for using the National Public Defense Workload Study model. The Judicial Department's analysis says the 6-year plan underestimates the amount of cases public defenders in Oregon need to handle, especially in terms of felonies and high misdemeanors. You can see the actual caseloads there in yellow, and then the estimate from the 6-year plan in peach. So the OPDC is planning for public defenders to take fewer cases, but the Judicial Department is saying the plan to solve this moving forward won't cover enough cases. Does that mean even more cases will go unrepresented? Well, the 6-year plan wants to solve that issue by nearly doubling the current amount of defense attorneys. The number of public defenders in Oregon has been going up gradually over the last few years, but because of turnover, it hasn't been going up fast enough to actually meet the pace of OPDC's plan. And if the state wants to keep expanding the pool of public defenders, it's going to have to keep spending more and more money to get them. And there's no guarantee the legislature will give it to them. So there are problems just about everywhere you look here. More cases than expected, fewer attorneys than expected, and plans to have public defenders take fewer cases. Doesn't really add up. And that has lawmakers like Representative Evans wondering whether Oregon is realistically on a path to deal with the crisis or making it worse. He actually called for the OPDC's executive director to step down and said the National Guard should be mobilized to provide attorneys. So far, that has not happened, and perhaps was a bit of a political showmanship, but you get the message. And that brings us to another issue with the 6-year plan that could have major effects here in the Portland Metro, especially in Clackamas County. Currently, Oregon law phases out contracts with private public defense terms by 2027, most of them in larger groups called consortia. Those consortia are a major component of Oregon's current public defense system. Now, people we've talked to in those groups say they handle something like 60% of public defense cases across the state. They're also probably the most stable source of public defenders the state has right now. There's not as much turnover compared to nonprofits. And under the state's current 6-year plan, that phases out consortia by 2027. The only alternatives will be to work for a nonprofit take a job at the state trial division, or work independent hourly contracts with the state. Now, folks in consortia now tell us many attorneys would likely take fewer cases as part of the hourly contracts or leave public defense altogether. In Multnomah County, a consortium is the third largest provider in terms of caseload, behind two nonprofits. In Clackamas County, the consortium is the only provider. It's called the Clackamas Indigent Defense Corporation, or CIDC. They routinely hit or exceed their caseload limits, and Clackamas doesn't have anywhere near as many unrepresented defendants as Multnomah, Washington, or Marion counties. So why is that? Here's Executive Director Kevin Like.
The simple answer to that is we have a lot of very experienced attorneys who've been here for a long time, and an experienced attorney can handle a higher level of cases, a larger number of cases than a new attorney. And again, you have people that have been around for a while making a reasonable living. You don't have the kind of turnover problems that they're having in some of the other jurisdictions. And turnover is just a killer when it comes to criminal cases. You have somebody leave and they've got 50 or 60 cases in their caseload. Those cases get moved on to a new person. They get shifted. A lot of institutional memory is lost, and it just builds upon itself and gets completely dysfunctional. And we've been incredibly lucky to keep and maintain really good people. It's a common line that we use all the time. People don't leave Clackamas Indigent Defense, people retire from Clackamas Indigent Defense.
Now, we also spoke with one of the defense attorneys working with Like's consortium, Ruben Medina. Both of them worked as nonprofit public defenders elsewhere in the Portland metro area once upon a time. So they know what that's like too.
I think Multnomah County, the caseloads have always been a bit difficult to handle. When I was in Multnomah County, my caseload was very high. You know, we represented everyone, and there wasn't an unrepresented crisis, but they were very high caseloads. And I think that's because of the population level in Portland and Multnomah County. My caseloads, if on average, I probably had like 130, 140 cases at a time. I have at most half that in Clackamas County today, sometimes even lower than that.
According to Like and Medina, things work much more smoothly in Clackamas County. In part, that's because their consortium has a reliable roster of attorneys. The caseloads are more manageable, and they've built strong relationships in the local justice system. But as we mentioned earlier, consortia are supposed to go away in 2027, when the legislature made that decision with Senate Bill in 2023. A lot of consortia attorneys were stunned. They don't think lawmakers understand the consequences, and attorneys argue it's because those in Salem were not seeing the full picture.
So those decisions were made without the full breadth of information in regards to what consortia do in the state. Today, we have numbers that we can work off. We know that consortia handle a large volume of the state's indigent defense cases, probably a majority. To be honest with you, we also know that in the majority of counties in the state of Oregon, consortia are the only game in town. They're the only ones providing indigent defense work in those counties. And so I think that's one of the considerations and why this is back on the legislative agenda, because why would you eliminate a consortia model that seems to be working in a lot of the counties in the state, including here in Clackamas County?
The legislature is considering changing the 2027 sunset on using consortia, and tomorrow night we'll explore some of the bills being discussed in Salem. I'm sitting down with the district attorneys for both Multnomah and Washington counties in the morning to talk about that. But it's worth noting that of the public defenders we've talked to, both nonprofit and consortia, none of them think that their way is the only way. They say each method of public defense serves a purpose.
I do this work because I love it. And the thing that scares me is what that's going to do to all of the people out there that need attorneys. And you think about this, I don't know, I worry about maybe the public think about it sometimes, and they're like, well, it's just a bunch of people who got charged with crimes. But there are people in there who have low-level offenses, and because the cases are pending and not resolved, they can't get housing, they can't get jobs. It's a downward spiral for them. And that's even setting aside the people who are just flat out innocent.
So the Oregon Judicial Department sees the state's 6-year plan as a mess when it comes to public defenders. And so does Representative Paul Evans. But what do you think? Email us at thestory@kgw.com or call and leave a voicemail 503-226-5090. Or you can always hit us up on social media.